G3 Assistance through Virginia's community colleges is your pathway to a new future, helping those who qualify pay for school and train for the right career. Right where you are, right now. Get a skill. Get a job. Get ahead. You can learn more at vccs.edu/G3.
This is a CBC podcast.
Well, it's time once again to check in with Ainsley and Andrew Hawthorne to take a look at past pandemics to try to make sense of current events. Today's COVID-19 vaccines are shipped around the world by airplane to get where they need to go quickly. But this week, Ainsley and Andrew Hawthorne take a look at the Great Serum Run, when all that stood in the way of an Alaskan community and a deadly outbreak was one unstoppable sled dog team. Here's this week's Apocalypse Then.
Vaccine availability has been top of mind really since before there were even vaccines. New measures are changing all the time, it seems, almost daily now, to make sure that provinces both have enough vaccine to deliver and also have enough vaccine clinics with people to deliver those vaccines. I imagine that it's really always been the case that having a cure and getting it where it needs to be are two very different things.
Yes, and one of the most adventurous journeys to get a treatment where it needed to be in a time of epidemic was the Great Serum Run of 1925, which was also called at the time the Great Race of Mercy.
The Great Race of Mercy.
That's
okay.
right. So what happened was around Christmas 1924 in the community of Nome, Alaska.
How festive.
The local doctor in Nome, Alaska, who's named Curtis Welch, he started treating some of his child patients for sore throat. And at first he thought it was just tonsillitis. But within a couple of weeks, children started dying. And he realized he was dealing with something much more serious. It was a diphtheria outbreak.
Yikes. That's a nasty one.
It is. It's a serious bacterial infection. And what it does is it creates this thick, leathery membrane that covers your tonsils and your throat and can actually suffocate you. The worst part of it was that it most severely affected children. So the fatality rate in adults was around 5 to 10%. But in kids under 5, it was fatal 20% of the time.
Yikes.
Now, at the time, there were about 1,500 people living in Nome itself and 10,000 more in the surrounding area. The community instituted a quarantine, but it was already too late. The outbreak had begun, people had been exposed, and it continued to grow. There was a cure available, an antitoxin.
Okay, so some good news.
Yeah, there was good news, and Nome did have a very, very small supply, but it was expired. The doctor in the community had actually ordered more, but it hadn't arrived before the onset of winter.
Not easy to get stuff all the way up to Nome, I guess.
No, Nome was extremely isolated from the surrounding areas. Over the winter, it couldn't be reached by sea or by air. And the reason for that is because the planes at the time had open cockpits, and it was just so cold that the pilots would freeze before they arrived at the community. A surgeon in Anchorage, Alaska, happened to find a supply of antitoxin in a storeroom. It was enough to treat about 30 people, but the question was how to get it to Nome in the middle of the winter. They could get it by train as far as a community called Nenana, which is close to Fairbanks, but from there it would have to go overland by dog sled.
Cool.
Yes, that was the only way to travel that distance between the two communities. And we're not talking about a small distance, 1,000 kilometers.
It's just Cain's Quest all the way with the cure for this disease.
It is. And normally it was a very long journey at that time of year. So mail was delivered that way and normally took a month. It took about 30 days for mail to get from Nenana into Nome. So on January 27th, the serum arrives in Nenana, and this race to get it to Nome began. So the original plan was to send out 2 dog sled teams, one from Nome, one from Nenana. They'd meet in the middle, exchange the serum, and bring it back. But authorities ultimately added more teams so that the relay could happen more quickly.
You'd have more chance of success.
That's exactly right. And if the teams were covering shorter distances, you wouldn't have to take as many breaks for people to rest up and sleep. So there were 20 mushers involved, 160 dogs
wow.
in all, and they stopped really only to warm up the serum at roadhouses along the way so that it didn't freeze. There was a storm system moving in, and they were contending with driving snow, with gale force winds, and a wind chill up to 65 degrees below Celsius.
Wow. Okay.
And remember, at that time of year, we're talking about the Arctic Circle. They're only getting 6 to 7 hours of daylight each day.
So really, it's kind of a perfect storm of not the right time to be having a plague break out.
No, absolutely. It's an unreal circumstance. And the result was feats of heroism, both human and animal, that were absolutely outstanding. So some of the relay mushers arrived at the exchange points with their faces blackened by frostbite. It was so cold out. One musher's hands froze to his sled's handlebar, and a roadhouse owner had to pour hot water over them to get them free. The blizzard got so bad that the doctor in Nome gave an order that the mushers should stop. It was just too dangerous, but they decided to keep going, even sledding through the night so that they could go as fast as humanly possible. But the greatest heroes of this event were probably a champion musher from Nome named Leonard Sapala and his lead dog, Togo.
Oh, I've heard of Togo. There's a movie about Togo.
There's a Disney movie, which is really fun. It kind of compresses some of the amazing events in this animal's life and focuses around the Great Race of Mercy. So when they set out from Nome, Sapala believed that they were going to be doing half the route themselves. He still thought there were only going to be 2 mushers involved and didn't realize that they were adding additional relay teams to help. Togo, the lead dog, was a 12-year-old Siberian sled dog. He was small for a sled dog, only 48 pounds. And at 12, he was already pretty elderly, but he was brilliant, considered a natural leader, and one of the best dogs that had ever traveled the Alaska Trail. That's how he was
a very
described.
good boy.
He was a very, very good dog. Even though there were other mushers involved, Sapala and Togo and the rest of their team covered the most dangerous part of the trail, which was the area that crossed Norton Sound. So this is part of the sea that was covered in sea ice, and it was a shortcut if the dog sled team went over the ice instead of going by land. But it could break up, and so was very dangerous. There was actually a previous time they had crossed it where they had wound up stranded on an ice floe, and Togo had actually leaped into the water to grab the rope attached to the sled. He'd wrapped it around himself and pulled the ice floe to shore to get the rest of his team on land.
The dog did
The
this.
dog did that himself. That's
Okay.
right. Now on
The
this,
dog officially has more wherewithal than I do.
Oh, very, very strong, clearly brilliant. During the Great Serum Run, the blizzard was so fierce and it was so dark at the time they were traversing Norton Sound that Sapala actually couldn't see the path. So he just let Togo lead. And Togo took them straight to the roadhouse where they overnighted and then picked their way between the ice floes the next day to get them safely to the other side of the sound. Apparently, the ice broke up only hours after they got over it.
So what happened? Did they get in okay?
They did. The serum reached Nome, and it was enough to treat the patients who were sick. No one else died of the disease in Nome. They did a second run to bring more serum to treat any further patients. The entire relay, which normally takes 30 days, and the previous record had been 9 days, was completed in 5.5 days. The average musher in the relay did 50 kilometers. Sapala, Togo, and their team did 420 kilometers themselves, traveling for 5 days out of the 5.5.
And then they went right back out and did it again for more serum.
And this year, in a beautiful gesture, one of the mushers in Alaska's annual Iditarod dog sled race, Larry Doherty, actually carried empty vials of COVID vaccine with him as a symbol of hope and a nod to the Great Race of Mercy.
That's Ainsley and Andrew Hawthorne with another edition of Apocalypse Then.
For more CBC podcasts, go to cbc.ca/podcasts.